I consider myself to be fairly fortunate to have had the parents that I have. They're wonderful people who've, I think, done a really good job in raising me and my brother. And one of the things that was always important to my folks, though, was that we went to church. My parents wanted to raise my brother and I with a faith background and wanted us to understand who Jesus is and what he did for us and everything along the lines of Christianity. And so they made sure that when we were living under their roof, that we were in church every Sunday. I can actually count probably on one hand how many times we missed church from the time I was born till the time I moved out of my parents' house. But just because my parents wanted us to be in church and made that important to us, it didn't mean that we always rode to church all together as a family. See, my dad was a greeter at our church every Sunday. When people walked in the door, no matter how early that they got to church, they were there with Scott Bogue with a hand outstretched and a big old smile welcoming him in to church. My dad wanted to make sure that anybody who walked in the doors of that church felt welcome there. And so he went out of his way to greet just about everybody. So my dad being a greeter meant that he had to be at the church significantly earlier than anybody else, which really wasn't a problem for my dad. My dad's always been a morning person. He can roll out of bed at 5 or 5:30 in the morning and just hit the ground and run and be ready to go with his day. He's always a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed kind of person in the morning. My mom, on the other hand, isn't much of a morning person. She enjoys sleeping in, and she enjoys not feeling rushed in the mornings and things like that. So pretty much every Sunday, it meant that my parents would drive separately to church. Most of the time, this wasn't a problem at all. My parents would, or my dad would head to church first thing in the morning. My mom and I and my brother would come later on. And then when church was over, a lot of the time I would go home with mom to help her get ready for lunch or do whatever. Occasionally, though, I would stay at church, and my dad would end up, taking me home. Maybe because I wanted to stay and hang out with my friends a little bit longer or do something like that. Usually, this wasn't much of an issue in our household. You'll notice I use the word usually. There was one fateful Sunday morning when I was around 8 years old, I think. And my parents, well, they forgot something really important at the church. It started off as any other Sunday did. I rode into church with my mom and my brother and kind of did the Sunday school thing and then went to children's church afterwards while my parents went into the sanctuary to have big church and did all that sort of thing. When children's church let out, my friends and I, we started playing basketball in the gym and just kind of hanging out and goofing around and doing the things that 8-year-old kids do. And as the morning went on, though, and as big church let out, one by one, my friends started disappearing until it was just me standing in the gym still playing basketball. At first, I didn't think anything of this because I thought it's no big deal. My mom is going to come and get me, or if she doesn't, then my dad will be along in just a few minutes, and I'll go home with him, and that'll be fine. It happened so often. But this particular Sunday, some wires may have gotten crossed or maybe some sort of miscommunication, as happens with us as people, because not only had my mom had gone home at this point in time, but so had my dad. See, my dad, as being a real estate agent, oftentimes on Sunday afternoons, he has an open house that he has to go and get ready for. And this particular Sunday, he had one, and it was a house that he needed to go and make sure was all set to go. So it meant he had to leave church earlier than what he normally did. He still got there after my mom, and my mom was already in the bedroom changing out of her church clothes when he walked in to go change out of his. And so when my mom saw my dad, she just assumed that I had come home with him and that maybe I was upstairs in my room getting changed out of my church clothes or hanging out until lunchtime or whatever. And so she just kind of didn't think anything of it and went back and got lunch all prepared for all of us. And when lunch was finally ready and she was ready for us all to come to the table to eat, she hollered upstairs for me to come down and that it was time to eat. My bedroom was the only bedroom that was upstairs, so the fact that she hadn't seen me up to this point was still not outside of the norm for her. But when she hollered up, and I didn't come downstairs, she was a little curious about that. She sat down at the dinner table, though, or at the lunch table, not thinking anything of it, and asked my father if I'd gone off to hang out at one of my friend's house that afternoon or something like that. And my dad said no, that he thought that she had brought me home. And it was about that moment that the phone rang. And on the other end of that phone was their 8-year-old son crying, letting them know that they had forgotten something kind of important at church that day. In fact, I wouldn't have been able to make that phone call had somebody not come back to the church to make sure that all the lights were turned off and the doors were locked and all that good stuff, because the phone lines there were just a little funky. For some reason or other, whoever set up the phone lines at that time made it so you couldn't make an outgoing call unless you press star or you press 9 or something like that. But they didn't really tell 8-year-old Brandon that that's how you did it. So whenever I grabbed the phone line and tried to dial in my phone number from home and stuff, nothing would happen because I didn't press the right button, whether, again, that's star or 9 or something along those lines. So that person, and for the life of me, I can't remember who it was because I think I was just in such a state of panic at that point. He showed me how to make outgoing calls and stuff, and I called my folks, and sure enough, within just a few minutes, my dad was there. And what followed is a scene that I'm sure must have been hilarious if somebody would have been watching the situation, a casual observer who kind of oversaw it, as they would see my dad apologizing up and down the wall and making promises that this would never happen again, while his 8-year-old son, with his eyes red with tears and stuff, sat on the other side of the car with arms folded and my brow furrowed and a look on my face that said, "I may never forgive you for this one." But the reality of the situation was, it wasn't really anybody's fault. It was just something that had happened. Some miscommunication along the lines, but it resulted in my parents not realizing they had forgotten something important. Sometimes I think we're all guilty of missing something that's important. We tend to overlook things as we make our plans or go through our everyday lives, and then like a bolt out of blue, maybe while we're laying in bed that night or maybe just, on down the road when it's too late to do anything about it, we make that realization that, oh, I forgot all about that. We just completely overlooked something important. Maybe it was some sort of an important date or a deadline or somebody's birthday, or maybe it's something at home or at work. Just maybe even it's your own kid. I mean, let's face it, kids can be kind of squirrely, especially the older they get. Myself personally, I've thought about putting like one of those GPS tracker chips in my children. Don't tell them I said that. But it's easy to kind of lose track of things that are important, and especially in the case of children. I mean, it was even easy to lose track of the Son of God. The Gospel of Luke gives us a glimpse into what we're talking about here today. It's a story you're likely familiar with. It gets brought up from time to time, especially this time of the year, I think. It's kind of a Christmas hangover story, if you will. See, most of the time in the gospel narratives, whenever we get to the birth of Jesus, we get to see all the events that lead up to it. We get to hear about the prophecies and the lineage and all that good stuff. We hear about the shepherds and the magi and how they play into that story and everything, but it kind of seems like that's it. I mean, they give us the birth and they kind of show us Jesus in the manger and all that stuff, but then they just all kind of fast forward to when Jesus is about 30 years old. We don't really get a glimpse into what Jesus might have been like as a child, or what kind of boy he was. Was he obedient? Was he a rapscallion? Was he, we don't really know, to be honest with you. But we get a small look at Jesus as being a child in the latter part of Luke chapter 2, a little bit beyond the story that we've all been reading this past week. So if you got a Bible or your Bible app, open it up to Luke chapter 2, verses 41 through 50. It says this. It says, every year, his parents traveled to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. When he was 12 years old, they went up according to the custom of the festival. After those days were over, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming he was in their traveling party, they went a day's journey. Then they began to look for him among their relatives and their friends. And when they didn't find him, they returned to Jerusalem in order to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all those who heard him were astounded at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked them. Didn't you know that it was necessary for me to be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he had said to them. Now, there's a few things going on here that I think is important to unpack. But before we really even begin to unpack that, I kind of want to point out something that I think is interesting. It really is not going to play into the rest of what we're going to talk about, but it's something to kind of maybe keep in the back of your mind. You never know when you might need that sort of thing. But verse 41 gives us the notion that Jesus and his family went to Jerusalem every year for Passover. And given the time period on the calendar it was whenever Jesus went to Jerusalem ultimately to go to the cross, it's kind of an interesting little tidbit, don't you think? But again, that's not going to really play into anything else we're going to talk about. It's just something extra. You're welcome. But Jesus and his parents at this point in time are heading to Jerusalem from their home in order to celebrate the Passover. And the journey from Nazareth, the town that Jesus is from, the town that Mary and Joseph both lived in before then, the journey from Nazareth down to Jerusalem is about a 3 to 5 day walk. I mean, in this time period, we didn't obviously have cars, and animals were kind of scarce. I mean, you occasionally have them, but most of the time they were hard to come by. So it was pretty general that you would walk this direction. Now, verse 44 kind of gives us the indication that they are traveling in a large group, and this is kind of out of necessity. See, Jerusalem is a very large city at this point in time. And outside of the city, and particularly in the area that this is in, it's a very rocky and hilly area, there were a lot of places for people to hide outside of the city. Oftentimes, folks went in Jerusalem to go and conduct business or to go make money of some kind. And so they would be in Jerusalem, they'd have their business, they'd make their money or whatever, then they would leave. And as they would leave, oftentimes, because of such great hiding places and because it was a large city and they could get away with it, they would oftentimes run into bandits or robbers or thieves, sometimes even murderers. And so the reason why Jesus and his family are traveling in such a large group is probably to kind of ward that sort of element off. It kind of gets rid of those people if they think, man, if they were just 1 or 2 or even 3 people here, I could probably take care of this, but with the crowd this size, I don't think I can handle it. And so it's more out of necessity and out of safety, really, that they're traveling in this big group. So they go and they celebrate the Passover, and after the festival is over and they've had the feast, they've done all the good stuff of celebrating the holidays, it's time for them to head home. And Mary and Joseph don't know it yet, but they're missing something rather important. Jesus is not with the rest of the traveling party. He's not with his mother and his father. He stayed behind. And they don't know it yet. Now, let's give Mary and Joseph some grace here, because this particular passage is very quick to point out to us that Jesus is about 12 years old, and they're traveling with a large group of friends and family. Now, I don't know what you know about 12-year-old boys, but having worked in youth ministry for a little while, I can tell you 12-year-old guys, if given the option of hanging out with their parents or almost anyone else, will generally pick anyone else. Most 12-year-old guys don't like to hang around with mom and dad. They want to go off and do stuff with their friends. They want to go hang out with their cousins. They want to go do all kinds of different things. So the idea that Jesus is not with Mary and Joseph in this traveling party and they don't recognize it yet, it's really not that far-fetched. It's pretty understandable, in fact, because they probably just assume that Jesus is hanging out with his cousins, or he's over here playing with the other kids, or he's just entertaining himself somewhere else. So they get about a day's journey, and after walking for that full day, it's kind of become time for them to set up camp and to kind of get settled in and maybe even have some dinner. So it's time for Jesus to be back amongst his family. So they begin to call for him, but he doesn't come. They call for him again, and still nothing. Joseph probably begins to use, what I lovingly refer to as the dad voice, but nothing. Now they're probably getting a little more irritated than anything else because their soon-to-be teenage son is not quite responding to what they want from him. He's not moving in the way that they want him to be, so they're probably getting a little irritated. So they kind of start going around all the different families in the traveling party to see if they've seen their son. And you can kind of imagine the first few that they walk up to is just, I'm sorry, Carl, have you seen Jesus anywhere? I can't find him. hey, have you guys seen my son? He's run off somewhere and I don't know where he's at. But after talking with a few families and after talking with a few members of the traveling party and finding out that nobody's seen Jesus so far, a strange feeling begins to well up within Mary. A dread that she just can't quite define. And finally, after they've talked to just about everybody in this traveling party, it begins to go from a small dread to a full-on terror. Because now they're making a realization. Jesus is missing. He's not here. And as they kind of retrace their steps, they're realizing, I think we left our son in Jerusalem, the largest city in our country. And he's been there all day. You kind of get an image of some of the pictures that are running through Mary and Joseph's mind of, because I think every parent in this particular moment, our minds just kind of naturally go to the worst case scenario. And so Mary and Joseph realize that in this moment we have to go back, and we have to go back now. And so Mary and Joseph rush back, and they get to Jerusalem just as quick as they can. They're practically running the entire distance. They're doing everything they can to get there as quickly as they can. And you can kind of see that when they get there, they're frantically trying to see where Jesus might be. They check every street, they check every alley, they check every dark corner. They go through places that they never would be caught dead at in the midst of the Jerusalem. And all the while their thoughts are getting blacker and blacker with each passing moment. I mean, this isn't just any kid that's missing. This is the kid. This is the one the angels said would be the fulfillment of God. And they've lost him. They keep searching. They're losing sleep. They're not eating. They're desperate. Searching for their boy in one of the largest cities. 3 days. 3. Searching, going crazy, and worrying, and just hoping to find out something at this point in time. And finally, after 3 days, a thought crosses their mind of maybe we should go to the temple. Because if we can go to the temple, maybe there at least we can get some of the people there to help us out, because these are the people of God, right? These are the people who are there to learn more about God and to follow God and to do his will. So maybe they'll at least help us look for our son. So they make their way to the center of town, to the temple, and they get into the temple courts, and well, there he is. There's Jesus, sitting there amongst the teachers and all the people that are there to listen. And well, he isn't panicked. He doesn't look worried. It's almost like he hasn't even noticed. He's just been listening and commenting and questioning. He's saying things that are impressing these teachers and these rabbis, and they've been doing this for a long time. And so the notion that this 12-year-old kid is impressing them with his knowledge, that's different. But Jesus is completely at ease. Almost as if, it's almost as if he belongs there. Mary, you kind of get this picture of her just doing that mom charge. You know what I'm talking about, where you got in trouble as a kid and your mom is not running, she is marching her way straight to you. And you can almost picture her face in this moment. Her hair's frazzled and maybe a few loose strands are poking out of the covering that she has on, and her eyes have heavy bags underneath them because she's not been sleeping. Maybe her cheeks are getting a little sunken in because she hasn't been eating. She has this look on her face that's both equal parts relief and maybe even anger. And she grabs Jesus by the shoulders and she says to him, "Why have you done this to us? Why have you treated us like this? Didn't you know that we were worried about you? We've looked everywhere for you, son. Where were you?" But Jesus almost looks confused at his mom's reaction. Maybe even puzzled. And he says to her what we see in verse 49. He says, "Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" I mean, if we really look at the way that Jesus is phrasing all of this, it says like it should have been obvious to you that this is where I would be. This should have been the first place you thought to go look. Like, why would you have looked anywhere else when you knew I would be here, doing the will of my Father? I had to be here. I had to be here in the place that's dedicated to the one who sent me. I can't speak for you. But I know that for myself that there have been a lot of times in my life where I've just been kind of going along and making my own plans and coming up with my own ideas of what would be best for me in my life, but I overlooked something really important. I mean, this is the time of the year where all of us, we're making plans of how we're going to change things in our lives and how we're going to be better and how we're going to lose weight and how we're just going to, by this time next year, our life is going to be so much better than what it really is. We kind of buy into this mindset of, well, it's a new year, so it's going to be a new me. But does anything ever really change? Does anything ever really happen for us? I mean, if you're anything like me, far more times than I care to recount, I find myself at this time again next year really in the exact same place. Nothing's really changed. The goals that I had set out for myself back in January have been abandoned most of the time before the calendar ever even turns to February. We find ourselves in the exact same place, in the exact same situation, and maybe even the exact same struggles, maybe in the exact same problems. Maybe it's because while we're setting out and making all these plans for ourselves, maybe while we're coming up with our resolutions for the years and we're looking for these ways to make change, maybe we're missing something. Maybe, and just maybe, we're missing Jesus and the plans and ideas that He has for our lives. See, I think there's really only one way that we genuinely change. I think there's only one thing that can really help change our lives, not just for the better, but even for the best. And that's Jesus. He's the one thing that can really make all things new. He's the one thing that can make us not just a better version of ourselves, not just a better version of who we are right now, but the best version of who we can become. True change, I believe, doesn't happen without Jesus. And yet, most of the time we don't even consult Him as we make our list of resolutions and our list of goals and our list of changes. We don't seek out His will in our lives. We don't seek out what He wants to change and what He wants to do and the differences that He wants to make in us. Far too often, I've been guilty of creating my own list of resolutions and then praying that Jesus would bless my list. Maybe instead what I need to do is I need to approach Jesus with a blank piece of paper and tell Him, you know what, Jesus, this year, I want to change what You want to change about me. So what are the resolutions that You have for me? We don't often include Jesus in our plans because we don't really look for Him. And if I can be honest, and what I'm about to say may be hard for you to swallow, I mean, even especially given light of what we talked about last Sunday, we talked about how all of us have felt abandoned by God at some point in time and how sometimes it seems like God is nowhere near us, but I don't think that makes what I'm about to say any less true. And that's that I don't believe that Jesus is really that hard to find. I don't think He plays hide and seek with us. I don't think he he just shuts himself off from all of us. In fact, I think that most of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time, the reason why we can't find Jesus and the reason why we can't feel his presence in our lives and the reason why we wonder where has Jesus gone is because we weren't really looking for him that hard. See, because God tells us in Jeremiah 29:13, he says, you will seek me and you'll find me when you seek me with all your heart. Maybe instead of making a bunch of these plans and making our list of resolutions and our list of goals only to watch them burn up and fall to dust, maybe first we need to seek out Jesus. First we need to do everything we can to pursue him, to follow what he wants in our lives, to find out the things that Jesus wants to see in our lives in 2021. Because I believe that if we invest all of our energy and if we put all of our effort into following Jesus and we do everything that we can to make sure that we follow him as closely as possible, he's not just going to change us for the better. Jesus is going to change us for the best. Because no matter how great your list of resolutions or how amazing your list of goals for your life is, I promise you the list of resolutions and the list of goals that Jesus has for you is better. Because if we genuinely want to follow after Jesus, if we genuinely want to give him everything that we've got and to follow his plan for our lives, then we're going to stand here this time next year and go, wow, that was an amazing year. It was far better than anything I could have made. So if you want to make 2021 not just a great year, but your best year, I think it starts when we seek out Jesus. We make sure that he's not missing in our plans. When we pursue him above all else, I think he's going to give us not the life that we had expected, not the life that we even planned, but something that's far better. Let's close out this morning and let's close out 2020 by looking at the words of Jesus in John chapter 15, verse 5. Where he says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing.